A kind man took pity on a poor girl and allowed her to sing in the restaurant in exchange for food. When the boss arrived and saw what was happening in his establishment, he immediately. The morning sun crept over Chicago, painting the city in warm, golden light. Outside the Harmony Lounge, one of the city's most popular fine dining spots, a small figure sat huddled on the front steps. Serena, a 10-year-old girl with tangled hair and a tattered backpack, watched the restaurant staff through the glass doors with a mixture of longing and uncertainty. She clutched her stomach, the ache of hunger reminding her why she had come. Inside, John Peterson, the assistant manager, bustled about preparing for the lunch crowd. When he noticed Serena through the glass, he paused, concern flickering across his face. He stepped outside and crouched down to her level. "Hey there, sweetheart. Are you okay?" he asked gently. Serena hesitated, her large eyes searching his face. "I'm just looking for work. My mom's sick, and I need food." John's heart sank. "Work," he echoed, glancing at her worn shoes and thin frame. "How old are you?" 10, she answered, her voice barely a whisper. "But I can sing. My grandma taught me. Please, if you let me sing for food. I'll do my best." Her words struck a chord, and John stood, torn between protocol and compassion. The restaurant's reputation was impeccable, known for its live music and sophisticated clientele. Allowing a homeless girl inside might cause problems, but her desperation was undeniable. "Wait here," he said, disappearing back inside. Moments later, he returned, holding the door open. "Come on in. But just one performance, okay? If the boss finds out, I might lose my job." Serena nodded eagerly, her small hands clutching her backpack. Inside, the staff cast curious glances as John led her to the small stage tucked in a corner. "This is where we let musicians perform during dinner," he explained. "Think you're up for it?" Serena swallowed hard and nodded, her nerves beginning to show. She took her place, clutching an old microphone as the room fell quiet. With trembling hands, she began to sing, her voice soft at first but growing stronger with each note. Her voice, pure and angelic, filled the room, captivating the staff and the few early customers. John stood in the corner, stunned by the beauty of her performance. But just as the last note faded, the restaurant's front door swung open. Edward Carter, the imposing owner of the Harmony Lounge, stepped inside, and his sharp eyes immediately landed on the small girl on the stage. Edward Carter froze in the doorway, his piercing gaze fixed on the small girl standing under the dim stage light. The sight was so out of place in his polished restaurant that for a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. Slowly, he closed the door behind him, the soft click breaking the stunned silence. The staff exchanged nervous glances, the air thick with tension. John, still standing near the stage, shifted uneasily. "Edward," he began, his voice faltering, "what is going on here?" Edward's voice was calm but carried a sharp edge that made the room seem colder. Serena, who had been gripping the microphone tightly, shrank under his gaze. Her earlier confidence dissolved into fear. "I just wanted to sing," she stammered. "For food." Edward's brow furrowed as he took a step closer. "Sing? In my restaurant? Without permission?" His words were direct, but there was a flicker of something softer in his eyes as he looked at her small frame and trembling hands. John stepped forward, determined to explain. "She was outside, Edward. She hasn't eaten, and her mom is sick. I thought we could give her a chance. Just one song." Edward turned to John, his jaw tightening. "You thought bringing a homeless child into the Harmony Lounge was a good idea? Do you realize what this could do to our reputation?" "She's talented," John argued, his voice firmer now. "You should have heard her. The customers loved it." Edward's sharp retort was interrupted by a slow, deliberate clap. One of the patrons, a well-dressed woman sitting near the stage, stood and smiled. "That girl's voice is extraordinary," she said. "It's been a long time since I've heard something so pure and moving." A murmur of agreement rippled through the small group of diners. Edward glanced around, his grip on his composure tightening. He didn't like surprises, especially not in his carefully curated establishment. But the praise was undeniable. Turning back to Serena, Edward studied her for a moment longer. "What's your name?" he finally asked, his tone softer. "Serena," she whispered. Edward sighed, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. "All right, Serena. One meal. But this doesn't happen again. Understood?" Serena nodded quickly, her face lighting up with relief. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." As she stepped off the stage, John guided her toward the kitchen for a warm meal. Edward lingered near the doorway, watching her retreating figure. Despite his annoyance, her voice lingered in his mind, stirring a memory he couldn't quite place. Back in his office, Edward leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The girl was an anomaly, out of place yet compelling. For the first time in years, something had disrupted his rigid routine, and he wasn't sure how he felt about it. Later that evening, the Harmony Lounge hummed with its usual energy. The dinner crowd filled the tables, the soft hum of conversations blending with the soothing jazz music from the stage. Edward sat at his corner table, meticulously reviewing financial projections on his tablet. Yet, his mind kept wandering back to Serena. Her voice had been extraordinary, not just pleasant but deeply moving. It wasn't just talent, there was something familiar about it, something that tugged at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. It unsettled him. "Edward," John interrupted, appearing beside him cautiously, "about earlier." Edward set his tablet down and folded his arms. "I haven't forgotten, John." "What were you thinking?" John hesitated but stood his ground. "I know it was risky, but that girl needed help. And you saw the customers' reactions. They loved her." Edward sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't a charity, John. It's a business. We can't just—" "Sometimes it's more than that," John cut in, surprising himself with his boldness. "Her story, her voice, it adds something real, something people connect with." Edward frowned but didn't argue further. Instead, he asked, "Where is she now?" "She's finishing her meal in the kitchen," John said, his tone softening. "I gave her some extra to take home. Her mom's sick, Edward. It's just her and her mother trying to make it." The mention of a sick mother sent a chill down Edward's spine. For reasons he couldn't explain, it felt like a thread pulling him closer to Serena's story. Rising from his chair, he said, "I want to talk to her." In the kitchen, Serena sat at a small table, savoring a plate of pasta like it was a feast. When Edward entered, she looked up, startled. "Serena, right?" he asked, his voice even. She nodded, clutching her fork nervously. "Tell me about your mom," Edward said, sitting across from her. Serena hesitated before speaking. "Her name's Diana. She's sick, really sick. We moved here for her treatment, but it's been hard." The name hit Edward like a jolt. Diana. A wave of memories washed over him, a small-town girl with a radiant voice and a smile that could light up a room. Could it be the same Diana he had once loved and lost? The next morning, Edward couldn't shake the name from his mind. It seemed impossible, yet Serena's voice and mannerisms bore an uncanny resemblance to the woman who had once been his world. He hadn't thought of her in years, but now the memories flooded back, their laughter, her songs, and the promises he'd failed to keep. Driven by curiosity and a need for answers, Edward asked John to find out where Serena and her mother lived. That afternoon, Edward found himself standing outside a rundown apartment complex in a less affluent part of Chicago. The walls were cracked, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. It was a stark contrast to the luxurious world Edward inhabited. He knocked on the door of apartment 3B. Moments later, a frail voice called out, "Who is it?" "It's Edward Carter," he replied, unsure how much his name would mean to her. "I own the restaurant where Serena sang." The door opened slowly, revealing Diana. She looked older and thinner than he remembered, her once vibrant features now shadowed by exhaustion. Yet her eyes, the same expressive eyes that Serena had, were unmistakable. "Edward," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't believe it's you." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the years and unspoken words hanging heavily between them. Then Diana stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. The apartment was modest, with sparse furniture and a small stack of Serena's drawings on the coffee table. Edward's heart ached at the sight of their struggle. "I didn't know you were in Chicago," Edward began, his voice low. "When I met Serena, she reminded me of someone. I didn't realize." "I didn't expect to see you again," Diana interrupted gently, sinking into a chair. "Life has taken us down very different paths." Edward leaned forward. "Why didn't you ever reach out?" Diana hesitated, her gaze falling to her hands. "After you left, everything changed. I didn't want to burden you. And now," she gestured around the room. "I've been trying to make it work, but Serena deserves so much more." Her words pierced Edward's heart. "Let me help," he said firmly. "For Serena. For you. I owe you both that." Tears filled Diana's eyes. "Thank you, Edward. I don't know what else to say." "Then don't," he replied softly. "Let's start with getting you better." Over the following weeks, Edward threw himself into helping Serena and Diana. He used his connections to arrange for Diana to receive the best medical care available, covering all the costs himself. Though Diana was hesitant to accept such generosity, Edward's determination left her little choice. Meanwhile, Edward encouraged Serena to continue singing at the Harmony Lounge. Her voice began to draw crowds, with diners returning not just for the food but for the heartfelt performances of the young girl whose story touched them all. John and the staff embraced Serena, treating her like family, while Edward worked behind the scenes to help her grow. One evening, as the restaurant bustled with activity, Edward called Serena into his office. She entered nervously, still not entirely comfortable with his authoritative demeanor. "Serena," Edward began, his tone warm, "I have something to ask of you." "Yes, sir," she replied, her small hands clasped tightly. He smiled. "Stop calling me, sir. Just Edward." Serena nodded, a shy smile breaking through. "I want you to headline a special concert here," Edward said. "It's time more people heard your voice. We'll invite some prominent figures, including people who can help take your talent to the next level." Serena's eyes widened. "Me? A concert? But what if I mess up?" "You won't," Edward assured her. "You've got something special, Serena. Trust me." With encouragement from John, Patricia, and the rest of the staff, Serena began rehearsing relentlessly for the big night. Diana, still recovering in the hospital, called Serena daily to cheer her on. Finally, the night of the concert arrived. The Harmony Lounge was transformed, its usual ambience elevated with elegant lighting and floral arrangements. The restaurant was packed, with guests buzzing about the young prodigy they had come to hear. Behind the stage, Serena adjusted her dress and took a deep breath. Edward placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're ready," he said. "Go show them what you can do." As Serena stepped onto the stage, the spotlight illuminated her small frame. Her voice, pure and resonant, filled the room, silencing the crowd. Song after song, she sang her heart out, each note carrying the weight of her journey. And then, in the middle of her set, she spotted a familiar face in the audience, her mother, Diana. Despite her frailty, Diana had insisted on attending, and seeing her mother beaming with pride gave Serena the strength to deliver her most emotional performance yet. When the last note faded, the room erupted in applause, and Serena's eyes welled with tears. For the first time, she felt truly seen, loved, and supported. The thunderous applause still echoed in Serena's ears as she stepped off the stage. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she ran into Diana's open arms. The sight of her mother, frail but smiling brightly, made the moment even more magical. "You were amazing, sweetheart," Diana whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've never been prouder." Edward approached them, his face glowing with pride. "Serena, you brought the house down tonight. I knew you could do it." Serena looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Edward. For everything." "This is just the beginning," he replied, his tone both encouraging and determined. "You have a gift, and it's time we show the world." The next morning, the buzz from the concert spread like wildfire. Local papers wrote glowing reviews of Serena's performance, and patrons called the Harmony Lounge non-stop, eager to hear her sing again. Offers began to pour in, from music agents to event organizers, all wanting to feature the young prodigy. Edward, however, was cautious. "We need to take this one step at a time," he explained to Serena and Diana. "You're young, and I don't want this to overwhelm you." Diana nodded in agreement. "Edward's right. Your health and happiness come first, Serena." Serena smiled at both of them. "I just want to keep singing. As long as I have you two by my side, I know I'll be okay." It wasn't long before Edward made a life-changing decision. Sitting in his office one evening, he called Serena and Diana together. "I've been thinking about something important," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "Serena, you've become like family to me. And Diana, seeing you here again has reminded me of what truly matters. I want us to be a family, for real." Diana and Serena exchanged stunned glances. "Are you saying?" Diana began, her voice faltering. "Yes," Edward confirmed. "I want to adopt Serena and make sure you both never have to struggle again. This isn't just about helping, it's about belonging." Tears filled Diana's eyes as she nodded. "Edward, you've already done so much for us. If this is truly what you want, then, yes." Serena threw her arms around Edward. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I'll make you proud." For the first time in years, Serena felt the warmth of a complete family. Together, they set out on a new path, determined to face the future as one. For weeks, life felt almost perfect. Diana's health seemed to stabilize, Serena thrived in her performances, and the family bond between her, Diana, and Edward grew stronger every day. But just as they began to settle into this newfound happiness, an ominous shadow loomed over them. One brisk evening, as Serena rehearsed at the Harmony Lounge and Edward reviewed paperwork in his office, a call came from home. It was Patricia, the family nurse, her voice tight with urgency. "It's Diana," she said. Her breathings labored, and her fever spiked. "I've already called an ambulance." Edward dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, Serena close behind him. The ambulance lights flashed against the gray city streets as they pulled into the emergency room. Serena held tightly to Edward's hand, her face pale with fear. Inside, doctors worked quickly, stabilizing Diana and moving her to the ICU. Hours passed with little news. Edward and Serena sat in tense silence, Serena's small hands gripping the sleeves of her sweater. Finally, a doctor approached, his expression grave. "Diana has developed pneumonia," he explained. "It's a complication related to her previous condition. Her body is weak, and we'll need to monitor her closely. She's in critical condition, but we're doing everything we can." Serena burst into tears. "Why is this happening again?" she sobbed. She was getting better. Edward knelt beside her, steady despite his own fears. "I don't know why," he said softly, "but we've faced hard things before, Serena. We'll face this, too." Over the next days, the family clung together as Diana's condition fluctuated. Serena visited the ICU daily, singing softly at her mother's bedside despite her tears. Her voice, though trembling, seemed to reach Diana in her most fragile moments. One evening, Edward sat by Diana's bed, her hand frail in his. "You're not leaving us," he said firmly, his voice breaking. "We still need you. I still need you." Diana opened her eyes slightly and managed a weak smile. "I'm not giving up," she whispered. "But if something happens, promise me you'll keep Serena strong. Help her follow her dreams." Edward swallowed hard and nodded. "I promise." Though the fear lingered, Diana slowly began to respond to treatment. Days turned into weeks, and her health improved enough for her to leave the ICU. The scare left them shaken but more united than ever. Serena, determined to honor her mother's strength, poured her emotions into her music, her performances now carrying an even deeper sense of purpose. This moment of vulnerability became a turning point, a reminder of how fragile life could be and why they had to hold on to what truly mattered. Weeks after Diana's health scare, the family began to find their footing again. Diana, though still fragile, had returned home and was determined to support Serena's growing career. With Edward's encouragement, Serena accepted an invitation to perform at a prestigious charity gala held in Chicago's grandest theater. The event promised to be her biggest audience yet, a turning point in her journey as an artist. The days leading up to the gala were filled with preparation. Edward ensured everything was perfect, from Serena's dress to the arrangements at the theater. Diana, though unable to join the rehearsals, offered Serena words of wisdom. "Sing from your heart," she said, holding her daughter's hands. "Every note is a story, and yours is worth hearing." The night of the gala arrived, and the theater buzzed with excitement. Guests in elegant attire filled the grand hall, eager to hear the young girl whose voice had been the talk of the city. Edward and Diana sat in the front row, Diana wrapped in a soft shawl to shield her from the cool air. Her presence, though still frail, was a testament to her strength and determination. Backstage, Serena took a deep breath, her nerves almost overwhelming her. Edward appeared, his reassuring smile steadying her. "You've got this," he said. "Just remember why you're here, your voice, your story." They're ready to listen. The stage lights dimmed, and the audience hushed. Serena stepped into the spotlight, her elegant gown shimmering under the glow. She stood still for a moment, her hands gripping the microphone, then glanced at her mother. Diana smiled, her eyes filled with pride and love. Serena's voice rang out, soft at first but growing stronger with each note. She sang of hope, love, and resilience, her words carrying the weight of everything she had endured. The audience was spellbound, their expressions shifting from awe to tears as her music touched their hearts. As Serena's final song began, the theater fell silent. It was a melody she had written for her mother, a heartfelt ode to their struggles and triumphs. Diana's eyes glistened as she listened, and Edward discreetly wiped a tear from his cheek. When the last note faded, the room erupted into applause. Guests stood, clapping and cheering as Serena bowed deeply, tears streaming down her face. From the stage, she spotted Diana and Edward, their hands clasped tightly together, their faces radiating pride. After the performance, guests crowded around to congratulate Serena, many moved to tears by her story. But it was the quiet moment backstage, when Serena embraced Edward and Diana, that mattered most. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're proud of you," Diana whispered, her arms wrapped around her daughter. "You've shown the world your light." Edward placed a hand on Serena's shoulder. "This is only the beginning. You're going to do incredible things, Serena. And we'll be with you every step of the way." As the family left the theater that night, the city lights twinkling around them, they felt a profound sense of unity and purpose. Life would always have its challenges, but together, they had found something stronger: hope, love, and the courage to keep moving forward. Serena's music was more than her gift, it was a bridge that brought them together and a beacon for the future. Months after her breathtaking performance at the gala, Serena's life blossomed in ways she had never imagined. Her song, written for Diana, was recorded and released, quickly gaining national recognition. Offers from prestigious music labels poured in, but Serena, with Edward and Diana's guidance, chose carefully, ensuring her path remained true to her heart. Diana, though still recovering, grew stronger each day. She often accompanied Serena to events, her pride evident in every smile and word of encouragement. Edward became not only Serena's biggest supporter but also the steady anchor that kept their family together. On a quiet evening, the three of them sat together on the balcony of their home, overlooking the city lights. Serena strummed her guitar softly, humming a new melody. Diana rested her head against Edward's shoulder, her hand intertwined with his, while Edward watched Serena with a quiet pride that needed no words. "We've come a long way," Diana said, her voice warm and full of gratitude. "And we're just getting started," Edward replied, his gaze shifting to Serena. "Your music is going to change lives, just like it changed ours." Serena smiled at them, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you. We're a team, always." The melody Serena played floated into the night, a quiet promise of all the possibilities yet to come. Their journey had been anything but easy, but they had found each other, and together, they knew they could face anything. As the stars above sparkled, Serena looked at her mother and Edward, knowing they weren't just her family, they were her inspiration, her strength, and her home.